In this next session, Professor Schneider will discuss another important regulatory function, biosimilar pharmacovigilance, or PV for short. This refers to how regulators around the world monitor biosimilars for safety and efficacy. In order to do this effectively, a country's regulator needs to be able to track exactly which product was dispensed to a patient. They need to be able to tell a biosimilar apart from the reference product it is based on, but they also need to be able to tell it apart from other biosimilars. And they need to do this across large populations of patients, sometimes across multiple countries. And they also need to make sure the effects of each medicine, whether positive or negative, will be correctly attributed to the right product. Regulators in different countries have developed a number of different systems to try to accomplish this task. The World Health Organization has also taken the lead in proposing a global system that aims to extend the projections of a robust PV system to patients worldwide, something especially beneficial for patients in developing countries that might lack the financial resources to build and maintain their own biosimilar PV system.
This presentation is on improving biosimilar pharmacovigilance. Pharmacovigilance is a big word. It has 6 syllables, and I'm going to explain what that is in a little bit with a slide to help me. But let me precede my definition of pharmacovigilance in talking about this with an understanding of the regulatory environment surrounding the approval of drugs and why this topic is becoming increasingly important. Any regulator, be it the FDA or TGA in Australia or the EMA in Europe or Health Canada, has to balance 2 things when it comes to approving medicines for use in the clinical setting. The public relies on these regulatory agencies to make sure that the medicines that are available for use, that are going to be prescribed for them, are safe, primarily safe, and also effectiveness. But safety has been the primary driver of the drug regulatory process. The problem is ensuring complete safety takes an awfully long time. And so there's an emphasis historically, because of some bad examples of medicines getting on the market that caused serious harm or had to be withdrawn from the market, to get the medicate to focus on safety first. And then there are public health issues like COVID, where we want to get these medicines on the market more quickly, and we may be willing to balance the speed to the marketplace with making sure that they're safe. So as we've talked about in the previous presentations, biologics, originator biologics are very expensive. And so in order to bring these costs down, there's been abbreviated pathways have been developed and a shortening of the approval process to get these medicines available to drive costs. But we want to make sure that we do this in a way that safety is not affected. So if we focus too much on safety, we may not have these life-saving medicines more available on the market. And so in the case of biosimilars, the feeling was that the cost of clinical trials and the amount of time that was taking to do these would erase any cost savings that might be result from making sure that they were really safe. So this is the term pharmacovigilance that may be new to you, and it comes from the Greek and Latin word, so it's a hybrid word here. It's a combination of looking at medicines, but also being vigilant or watchful or attending to those. So it's what happens after a medicine is put onto the marketplace. So here's the actual definition from the FDA, Food and Drug Administration in the US. Pharmacovigilance is the science and activities related to the detection, assessment, understanding, and prevention of adverse effects or any other drug-related problems. So this would include any unwanted side effects, allergies, or more serious problems that a patient might experience after they've received an approved medicine in the clinical setting. One of the important fundamentals of pharmacovigilance is knowing exactly what medicine that the patient received. So I'd like to introduce to you two different naming conventions that are used in describing a medicine. One is a trade name or a brand name. And so an example of that would be Tylenol. Tylenol's a brand of acetaminophen. But we know that there are generic versions of Tylenol available. Here's an example of one. So these are both acetaminophen, and they share the same non-proprietary name, acetaminophen. So the molecules are exactly the same because they're generic medicines, but their brand names are different. So if we were to report an event associated with acetaminophen, we might not know whether it was a Tylenol brand or whether this generic medicine that was available. So part of the core to pharmacovigilance systems is knowing exactly what medicine the patient received. It even gets more complicated globally because the brand name, the trade names or brand names vary from country to country. The World Health Organization is attempting to address this because they assign international non-proprietary names through a program that they have in their central headquarters. And reminder, we've talked about this on a number of occasions, unlike generic drugs, though, biosimilars are not identical copies of the originator product. They are highly similar. So here's an example of a biosimilar infliximab. And while these are similar molecules, their biosimilars still share the same non-proprietary name because we do not have globally a system of distinguishable non-proprietary names. So we see the trade names differ on the right column there, and the manufacturers are listed in the left column. But of all these different infliximab products, they all use the same international non-proprietary name. And among different countries, they have different brand names. And so we may have, as a result, a misattribution of adverse events or side effects. If only the term infliximab is used when an event's reported, we won't know which of these products the patient received. There may be inadvertent or inappropriate substitution at the pharmacy level. The patient records may be incomplete because we can't tell exactly what medicine the patient received. And if there's a manufacturer's problem that requires a recall of the medicine, that would be difficult to do as well. So since all of these highly similar medicines share the same non-proprietary name, how do we tell them apart when we're trying to track their safety and effectiveness through these pharmacovigilance programs that we're talking about? Which one was given to the patient? Which one worked best? Which one needed to be recalled because of a manufacturing problem? Which one were you switched from and which one were you switched to? If they're all infliximab, we don't know the answer to those questions. Now, this is what's really happening when we looked at adverse drug reaction reports in different parts of the world. In Ireland, 18% of the adverse drug reaction reports are missing a brand name and only include a non-proprietary name that may be the same among different brands of the same of the biosimilar and the reference product. In the EU, 35% did not contain a brand name, even though the EU requires a brand name to be included in adverse drug reaction reports. Very often, as more than a third of the time, that doesn't happen. So we don't know. In the Canadian system, ironically, where a forced substitution system is being implemented in the different provinces, the brand name is missing in 37% of the time. So more than a third of the time, we can't tell what medicine the patient received. And in the UK, only 38% of the average drug reaction reports have an identifiable brand name. So we know we have a problem. And so we ask physicians, what do you include in an adverse drug reaction report? What percentage of physicians include a brand name in an adverse drug report? And you can see that it's not universally done. In Switzerland, it's done quite often, and in the EU, it's done more often, but not all the time. And probably the reason for that is that the EU requires brand names in the adverse drug reaction report. In spite of that requirement, we can see that it doesn't happen in all the countries. But in some of the other countries, including Canada, where we've talked about the forced switching program, it's done less frequently. And in the British Columbia, which is the first province to have for switching, it's only 52% of physicians say that they report a brand name with an adverse drug reaction report. And it's only 2/3 of the, or 3/4 of the time in the other provinces. And in Australia, again, talked about forced switching there, and in the US, where we have distinguishable non-proprietary names, it's done 50% of the time or less. So we've talked about the World Health Organization and the opportunity they have and the role that they are trying to play in resolving this issue. And so in 2014, their international non-proprietary name expert group recommended a 4-letter distinguishable suffix be included in addition to the shared INN. So as an example, infliximab would be followed by a 4-letter suffix like ABCD, for example, and that be traceable to the manufacturer. This program was called a biologic qualifier, or BQ. And so the rationale for having a system like this worldwide is so that we can identify the product that the patient has been prescribed and receiving, and depending on whether it's a reference product or a biosimilar, or one of many biosimilars if there's more than one, so that there's clear communication between the physician, patient, and pharmacist, so that there's fewer opportunities for accidental or inappropriate substitution. So it improves the pharmacovigilance and proper attribution of the adverse event to the right product that the patient actually received, which is the nature of this presentation, and increasing manufacturer accountability so that you can associate the specific product that a patient received with the company that made it. And so we've been working with WHO in support of the BQ proposal. And one of the things that we've done is to survey physicians to find out if they like the idea. And you can see that around the world, physicians have broad support for distinguishable non-proprietary names globally. But the WHO has recommended this, but the administrative body of the organization hasn't implemented the program yet. So it's still under review and dialogue and debate. But in the meantime, since there hasn't been a final action from WHO, Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration that approves medicine, while initially supportive of the WHO proposal, has reversed itself, and rather than develop their own system, has just decided to go to a system where there are shared international non-proprietary names. The FDA has implemented a system that's very much like the biosimilar or biologic qualifier program, using distinct suffix system with 4 letters. So we have that system in our country, so we can tell the difference. Health Canada has attempted to harmonize with the US, but eventually went with another system called using a shared INN, which we can't tell from that name, but also the drug identification number that's used primarily for billing and administrative purposes, and a brand name. So that's a system that's currently in place in Health Canada. So what are the objections? Why hasn't this BQ proposal moved ahead? Well, the arguments against the distinguishable non-proprietary names is that it might imply inferiority, that because we have to give it a separate name and we're worried about what might go wrong, that might imply inferiority. Secondly, it might undermine physician confidence because they may feel that it's, again, an inferior product and not as good as the originator. And as a result, it might hurt or the uptake or limit the uptake of biosimilars and the adoption of their use. But we found in our country, where we do have distinguishable non-proprietary names, that this is not the case. We asked physicians, in your opinion, does the use of an identifying suffix imply that a biosimilar is inferior to its reference product in terms of both safety and efficacy? 73% do not think the suffix implies inferiority. 12.5% thinks it does, but it's important to remember that every new originator product has a suffix now. And so it's not just the biosimilars. You can see the 91, almost 92% of physicians surveyed are very confident in the safety and efficacy of biosimilars. And so we think that, again, the use of a suffix system in our country has not eroded confidence in their use at all. And we can see that when we look at the marketplace, how often are biosimilars being used? We can see that in some cases, the adoption of biosimilars has been quite high, not 80% with filgrastim biosimilars, 70% with trastuzumab and bevacizumab biosimilars, and 55% with rituximab biosimilars. So biosimilar use in our country is comparable to that in many European countries. Recall that they do not have a system of distinguishable non-proprietary names, and we do. And so as a result, we can see that it has not held back the use of biosimilars in our country. So what we have today is kind of a mixed bag, and we have certain parts of the country, of the world, where there are distinguishable non-proprietary names, but in those countries, the systems are different, so they're not comparable, and we can't learn from each other's experiences very easily. And in other parts of the world, including the EU, Australia, and Canada, there's the use of a brand name is used to determine what the identity of the medicine that's being given to when a patient adverse drug event is reported. So many of these countries have moved along and are willing to support a WHO system if and when one is implemented. Now, the WHO has been looking around, and they've looked at 20 countries, particularly with their regulations governing the use of biosimilars. And here's a publication that was recently issued that identified naming, a lack of consistency in the naming of biologics and biosimilars as causing concern about prescribing mix-ups, unintended switching, and traceability. One of the models that we've used in discussing this with WHO comes from Jim Reasons in the UK, who studied high reliability organizations, including air traffic controllers, aircraft carriers, and nuclear power plants, where mistakes can be catastrophic. And so these are organizations that need redundant checks in their system to make sure that if one system of defense fails, another one will catch it. And only in a condition where all the systems fail will a hazardous condition result in a loss or an accident. So each of these slices is important. No one is more important than the other. So in summary for this, in terms of drug safety monitoring after a product is made available, we think that distinct naming brings a valuable protection to patients, including stronger pharmacovigilance, accurate tracking of side effects, adverse events, and increased manufacturer accountability for their products. We think patient protection of an international system like the one that the WHO has proposed through their BQ program is especially valuable in developing countries without the financial resources to have their own strong pharmacovigilance programs. But physicians do not consistently or reliably report brand names when they report an adverse event. So that using a brand name only is not the solution here. Physicians that are surveyed generally are supportive of distinct naming for biologics and biosimilars, probably because of the importance in improving patient safety and learning from clinical experience. And they certainly don't think it implies inferiority of a biosimilar compared to a reference product. And it hasn't been shown to reduce biosimilar usage in our country, where we do have a distinct naming system in place. And finally, we think WHO is the best place to do, organization to do this, because it's a global organization. And so we think that patients and regulators should urge the WHO to make an international naming standard available for those who want it. Thank you for your attention on this presentation.
As Professor Schneider discussed, strong pharmacovigilance is critical for biosimilars to be used safely and for the patients in the world to have confidence in them. If you'd like to learn more about how your organization can help support the WHO in extending these patient protections worldwide, you'll find that information in our Patient Advocacy Toolkit that we'll discuss later today. Up next, we're going to take a look at a country to learn about some of the problems that occur when physicians and patients lose confidence in their policymakers.